Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. This is the meeting of the Economy and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to go around the room if everyone can introduce yourselves. If we start with you over there, Rob.
Councillor Robles from Copperthorne. Councillor Barry Burgett, Bagley. Dan Wrench from the Climate Team.
Simon Starr from the Climate Team is also. Adrian Cooper is the Climate Task Force Team Manager.
Oliver Rowe, Climate Team. Sam Kirby-Bray, Climate Task Force.
Ian Nellens, portfolio holder for climate change, environment and transport, and I will have to leave early because of another meeting next door.
Mark Barrow, Executive Director for Replace. Also apologies for only being here for the first hour.
Joyce Barrow. I'm going green. Joyce Barrow, Chair. Sorry?
2 months. Yeah.
Ah, right.
Sorry.
Thank you. Joyce Barrow, Chair of this committee.
Tom Boggs, Scrutiny Manager for the Council.
Brad Cofield, Scrutiny Officer.
Royal Croft, Councillor for Market Regulation.
Steve Davenport, Councillor, Sir Martin Duddleston, Heath. Sorry.
In the room. Rosemary, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm mostly I've said much more insurance. Rosemary Town, based in London,
Still me.
Julian Dean, representing Court Hill.
Ed Potter, Shropshire Councillor for Lowton.
Nick Hignett, Shropshire Councillor for Vey Valley Ward.
Sarah Townsend, Committee Officer.
Thank you. We have no expected participants joining remotely via Teams. Before we start, I'd like to just let everybody know that we've had 2 call-ins, one on parking charges and the other is on the quarry swimming pool. I've been approached as to whether we should take it. I've looked at the reasons behind it. I think they're good and valid reasons. So that will be coming to this committee, and we're in the process of trying to sort out a day and a time. We should hopefully be within the next 2 weeks. Yes. Yes. They're from the Liberal Party and Labour Party. Right. Good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting of the Economy and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Members of the public will be able to view the meeting using the link on the agenda. Item 1 is apologies for absence, and we have apologies for Councillor Paul Wynne, who unfortunately isn't well today. Roy Aldcroft is substituting. He's coming at the very last minute. Thank you very much, Roy. Roger Evans also has given his apologies. We move to item 2, disclosable interest. Members are reminded that they must declare the disclosable pecuniary interest and other registrable or non-registrable interest in any matter being considered at the meeting as set out in Appendix B of the Members' Code of Conduct, and consider if they should leave the room prior to the item being considered. Does anybody have any? No? Okay, thank you. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Does anybody want to bring anything up? No. One thing I did ask about on the minutes, it mentioned the work that we did on banners, etc. And coming back hopefully to the committee, when were we hoping, Tom?
We're trying to aim to bring that back at least by the summer.
Yeah, because I think it's important to get that one done because it's been in the pipeline for quite some time. Thank you. Item 4, public questions. Do we have any?
Minutes, we need to move the minutes.
Yes, if you like. Would you want to move them? Okay, seconder. Everybody happy with that? And the votes? Yeah. Very strange looking along there and hands. Thank you for that. Public questions. Do we have any? No. No. Item 5, member question time. Do we have any?
No.
Item 6, delivering the Shropshire Council Climate Change Action Plan. Adrian Cooper, Climate Change Task Force Leader, will present the report. Here you go.
Thank you, Chair.
Just quickly to give you an overview, so that you know who's here and why they're here. So I brought the whole of my task force team today, partly so that you've got all the necessary expertise in the room to answer any questions that you might have later on, but also so you can put some faces to names. I thought that was a useful thing to happen. So from my left to Dan Wrench is the officer in the task force who deals with matters pertaining to carbon capture and storage, biodiversity, that type of activity, and is leading on the biochar work, which we might touch on later. To my immediate left, Simon Stallard, who is the task force lead for renewable energy related matters, including heat. To my right, Ollie Rowe, who is picking up at the moment, focusing on transport related carbon emissions and projects. And next to Ollie is Sam Gilby, who provides technical support across the whole agenda for us, but leads particularly on matters relating to carbon literacy training and harm monitoring activity of our own performance. So just put that out there for a bit of helpful context, hopefully, Chair. In terms of the report then, this is a report which provides a summary of our strategy, how we arrived at our strategy to some extent, what it covers, and our recent performance and the type of work which my task force is involved in delivering, and also starts to identify some things that we could potentially look at with Scrutiny Committee in terms of future priorities for our work. So just as a recap, Shropshire Council declared a climate emergency 2019 in May, and we brought forward a climate strategy and action plan in late 2020. There was an interim step, which was a strategy framework, which was late 2019. That was adopted and establishes an objective for the council for its corporate emissions to become net zero by 2030. That amounts to an annual reduction or improvement in performance of about 10% per annum, if it's a linear reduction. The Climate Change Task Force was established in late 2019 and has grown since that time to include the staff that you've got here present. And there was a further motion at Council, which is relevant in this space as context in September 21, which identified 8 key points, which I'm sure we will touch on later. Final piece of the jigsaw in terms of the operational consideration of the agenda is that a climate change and carbon reduction advisory group was established in September 22 to act as a critical friend and as a sounding board for portfolio holder, but it's not a decision-making body. It is a networking space for sharing what's going on and taking advice on this agenda. So we also report the council's carbon performance, which sounds really easy, but it isn't, because actually measuring carbon performance is quite difficult. There are different ways of modelling it. We can measure those emissions that derive from our own direct activity much more easily than we can the carbon emissions which are emitted on our behalf by people who supply us with goods and services. And that is the by far and away the largest part of our carbon footprint as an organisation, but estimates vary significantly depending on what modelling is used to track those. So we report annually on carbon performance, and the most recent report was the 7th of June of last year, and that indicated that there had been an increase in direct emissions, so that is heating our buildings, fueling our directly owned transport, for example, but a decrease in indirect emissions. And it was a very small decrease overall, which is disappointing, but we think reflects the fact that there's still some bouncing back post-COVID. Unfortunately, we started monitoring carbon emissions virtually in the middle of the pandemic, so it may not have been representative. Difficult to tell. Worth making the point that those indirect emissions now account for well over 90% of our footprint. So what we buy in is far more significant in terms of our performance than what we ourselves produce direct. And that, I think, will inform our approach moving forward. There is a range of different projects and initiatives which the team are involved with, and those things are designed to do several different things. They will help us to reduce our own carbon emissions. They will help to lead by example into a space where we hope other organisations and individuals may wish to follow, so that there is some benefit in terms of both carbon performance and potentially in terms of green growth across the wider county. And they help to engage people and teach them about climate change and its importance as an agenda item to all aspects of Shropshire Council's operation. And we can touch on some of those specific things later as we move forward. That is the kind of overview, Chair. In terms of finance, it is a pretty significant risk, this area. And I say that because whilst we don't overtly monetize carbon emissions at the moment, what we can see already is that climate change is impacting the delivery of our services as an organisation, and that will continue to be the case. Indeed, it may accelerate in terms of the level and severity of the impacts involved. And that's right across the piece. So it's not just about the cost of maintaining roads in poor weather, the inevitable potholes. It is potentially also much more insidious about people's mental health and well-being, their physical health, if they are increasingly having to endure more extreme weather conditions, be that heat or cold or wet or whatever it might be. There are implications for social care services in this, which are very, very important not to ignore. Focusing back on the indirect emissions, so the people who supply us goods and services, this is a really important area where increasingly good practice now is requiring companies of all sizes to actually start to track their emissions and then to put in place plans to reduce them in a managed way. And that is something that we are starting to do, but it's important to note in financial context that we are not the only people asking for this. It's not like we're at the leader of the pack here and we're asking for something that they shouldn't already be looking to do. So, for example, we know that the NHS already requires suppliers to take account of carbon performance in their procurement approach. In terms of the team's own budget, we have a standing revenue budget currently of £500,000 a year. But just to note that we have been quite successful in terms of bringing in grant monies, and that amounts to around about just shy of £4.5 million, £3.8 million in capital grant, I should say, and around about just over £500,000 in revenue costs. And we can provide a breakdown for that if required. Also worth noting that this team is by far and away not the only team involved in climate change related activity. And so, for example, the Council's Affordable Warmth team have been extremely successful. Though they're not represented here today, they have been extremely successful in getting grant monies in, capital grant monies, to retrofit social housing and housing for people who are in particular difficult financial circumstances. Don't quote me, but it's into the multiple tens of millions. So retrofitting houses is expensive, but I think they have been particularly successful. The same is true of colleagues in highways and transport who are closely involved in sort of work that Ollie may come on to describe later, and colleagues in the facilities management and estates functions of Shropshire Council who are looking at how best to manage the carbon implications of our buildings, both those which we have and those which we might be commissioning. So there are a range of different other officers involved in this activity. It's not just those people you've got here. Probably open it, leave it at that, Chair, I think, and you can take some questions, I think, to cover off anything. It is a very broad agenda, hence why I've brought my colleagues with me to help out.
Thank you, Adrian. Do you want to go, Gary?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of technical questions on the things you mentioned. You mentioned indirect organisations contribute 90% of the current climate targets. You mentioned a disparate number of ways of measuring. Surely, as the lead organisation, we should set the measuring tool and insist they follow that measuring tool so we get the same answer from all these organisations. And the second point you made, you said 10% reduction per year until 2030. So when was that from? And is it 10% of the remaining balance, or is it 10% of the starting balance?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So in terms of the first point, the modelling methodology, this is an area of work which is still changing. You're right, in the sense that it is for us to specify how an organisation might wish to measure its carbon emissions. At this point, there are different approaches to that, and there isn't a single means of doing that, which has been widely adopted. Now, I think over time that will settle down, and we will be in a position as part of our procurement policies, for example, to actually set out our stall and requirements about how that should be measured. Part of the problem here is the difference between measurement and modelling. So what we have done is to commission some modelling, and the modelling is based on assumptions, and largely the most detailed modelling we've had done was based on spending. And so it was an AI model which took details of everything that Shropshire Council bought in the last 3 years. And I do mean everything, right down to a pencil, and actually modelled the carbon implications of each one of those purchases. But I'm stressing the point, it is based on assumptions and coefficients, and it may not be entirely accurate. Much better is to have a situation in which our suppliers are actually measuring themselves what carbon is being emitted and actually telling us based on that measurement. And that is the point that we're hoping to get to. In respect to the second point, yes, it's a rule of thumb, 10%. So the strategy was adopted in 2020. The target date is 2030. So 100% reduction, which is net zero, amounts to 10% per annum over 10 years. But that is not an interim target, it's just a benchmark.
Oh. Thank you. Rosemary.
Yeah, thanks. Just to follow on a bit from that, Adrian, as you've heard me blathering on before, no doubt, I think procurement is absolutely vital. And until we bring the idea of the motion in 2021 was about bringing climate change considerations into the very heart of everything in the council. But that for me is about, yes, there's this third party emissions, if you like, that we have outsourced, which oddly enough we've done nationally as well. So we look quite good, don't we? Great bit PLC, but most of our resourcing is done outside. So we have our manufacturing done abroad. So we've done the same thing nationally. But I think we need to be looking, as well as what we procure. We look very much, we're all used to looking at finance as the sort of critical measurement of everything. And I believe personally that we're not too far away from the climate implications of any procurement that we undertake being at least as valuable or as relevant or as pertinent. Because if you want to look at finite resources, then the way we use our planetary resources, that's absolutely finite, isn't it? And I think procurement for me is absolutely the heart of where we need to embed this to really make change.
Thank you. Julian.
Guidance from you, Chair, first of all, because part of what we're doing here is also setting some terms of reference for a task and finish group. So clearly we can't do all the work of that.
No, can I suggest that we do that after we've
no,
asked the
absolutely.
question?
I suppose in that context,
Okay.
you know, questions might get into some detail, but obviously we're going to come back to that.
We are.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
good. Okay. first of all, I do think, just as a comment, I think we do need to acknowledge, without any criticism of any member of the team, that we have an all-male climate action team. It's just worth. I think we should note that, because it's, perhaps an issue, because women are going to be affected by climate change as well, I believe. Anyway, having said that, I think thank you very much for the report. I suppose the big question is to ask you as a team whether you think we're on track to get to carbon zero in terms of the authority by 2030, and what you think and where you think we are in terms of the county, and if not, why not? But that's obviously a huge question. But just in terms of a few specifics, I think the report mentions launching an adaptation strategy, and I think clearly, just come through 2 serious flooding events which felt like one, and that's going to repeat and more and more often, and the risk of heat waves is huge, and so my question about that is, clearly that seems to be in train. That's fantastic, but it's not just about the risk to the council, as you pointed out. There's a risk to the council because of the risk to residents, but then there's just the risk to residents anyway that we have to be concerned about. So, both in terms of flooding and weather events and overheating. And interesting what you said about other risks, including actually climate anxiety in our young people and all those sorts of things. So I think that any sort of adaptation strategy, it needs to have a serious community aspect to it, and local businesses aspect to it, and people's homes aspect to it. So I'll be interested in your views on that. The other next question was in the relationship. I suppose this is probably more in Dan's field, but be interested in your comments. Is the relationship between your work and the local nature recovery strategy? Because I'm just increasingly aware, although Councillor Nellens was at a town council event where we sort of had a really interesting sort of discussion about the nature of the local nature recovery strategy, if that makes sense. Or town and parish councils, perhaps we as Shropshire councillors aren't yet getting full sight of what this is going to look like. And I think understanding the potential contribution of the nature recovery strategy to our climate mitigation work, and the way they intersect in what is basically a rural county, where we've got presumed a lot of potential. That's an interesting thing. The next one is I suppose directed to, I think, Simon, in terms of the energy story. So I remember way back when we launched this, we were celebrating the fact that Shropshire could be producing, I can't remember what percentage, but we were looking at becoming a net exporter of renewable energy to the West Midlands. So the question is, has that story disappeared, or is it still a realistic? I know we've been limited by planning rules on, especially on wind power, but is that still a real story? Is that something that we can explore meaningfully? And I'll just do one more. And the final one, I suppose, is about the nature of the partnerships that we've got. So that stakeholder board, which I think I proposed, was an attempt to try and build something a bit like we see in other areas. There's been an initiative called Place-Based Carbon Action Network, PCAN, which I think has actually sort of come to an end as a project, but the partnerships that it established, as far as I know, are still in existence. And that's about bringing together the big players in any area. So as you said, the NHS, which presumably has a much bigger carbon footprint than we do in this county, but also, the business community, the football club, whoever it might be, sort of players who both have a carbon footprint, but also possibly have an influence and an impact, bringing all those people together to share green procurement, for example, to share approaches to discuss together how to decarbonise transport in the county, to discuss together actually addressing, the prospects for carbon capture in land, but also how do we address methane emissions and drying out of peat and all those sorts of things. So a really meaningful county-wide partnership. The stakeholder board is lovely, but in reality, there aren't many people there with real weight. There's some expertise, which is fantastic, and I hope it's useful. And to be completely blunt about it, the business chamber don't turn up, even though they get an invitation. So in terms of the weight of people out there who could possibly be working on their own emissions and the emissions of the county, I don't think we're there yet in terms of that partnership. So I'd just be interested in your comments on the reality of that and whether there's a prospect to build something a bit more robust as a partnership.
Can I just ask Julian a question? Who
Yeah.
are the people that you would want to be on this panel, on this?
So the ultimate is to have a partnership which is doubling up actually the job of community wealth building and decarbonising the county. So you've got the local big economic players, the anchor institution, they get called, coming together, looking at their own carbon footprint, and also, whilst you're at it, looking at developing, to use the jargon, a just transitioning the local economy away from fossil fuel to something which is sustainable and actually also good for local people. And, part of that would be building the skills and networks and companies that can do the retrofit job, not just in social housing, but in private housing. So, I don't know who would be on it. It would be every county, every area will have a different style, because we don't have huge steel works or something like that. We don't have the big heavy industry players, but we have the networks of industries, and then we have the big public sector organisations. And then, like I say, we have the sort of influencing organisations like a football club, which won't have its own big carbon footprint, but which speaks to a lot of people in the county. So it's worth having in the room.
And the hospital would be the biggest employee, wouldn't it? I know you're all three of you, I think, are waiting to come back with answers, but I just want to ask Mark, how do we do that? How do we get the people involved that we need involved? Or I don't mind which one of you. Why haven't we got them on board?
If I start, obviously, thanks. It was Julian who, it seems years ago, in Theatre 7 when he first suggested having a critical friend, and that has grown. And within that group, there are some people, for example, South Shropshire Climate Action, Chris Deves, etc., who do bring a bit of expertise, a bit of a different slant to it. But I think the point you're getting at is it's the business community who, although invited, haven't yet turned up. We need to maybe incentivise them to come in some way. So maybe a little bit of a stick possibly required there. But just pick up on a few things. First of all, when Rotary were talking about the procurement stuff, and I think there's a lot of great interest as we have to bring out a list, but the reality being is the procurement, we can set things, but we still need these things to happen. So, for example, domiciliary care, etc., we can't change them over, but we obviously have to measure it. So we have to, I think, be a bit sensitive just to what we can get away with influencing to a degree. We obviously want to push the parameters to try and bring them forward, but we still need these services to provide to keep things going. So I think we have to be a little bit realistic on that.
Ian, if I can come back to you, because there's more people want to ask questions, and I think we need to answer Julian's first, because they're all waiting to go. Over to you, Adrian.
If I start off, I think in terms of the question, are we on track? I'm gonna duck out and I'm going to give it to Ollie because Ollie and Sam have been working on this year's monitoring, which I think gives us the freshest perspective. I'm guessing the answer is no.
Yeah, I can come in on that. So as Adrian said, Sam and I have been pulling together the data for this year's monitoring, and we're still in that stage where, as Adrian mentioned, it's a bit, the effects of COVID aren't really known. So at the minute it's sort of like this. We're probably not going to see huge reductions this year. So if we're being very honest, we're not on track to meet the targets by 2030, but that would depend on how much we rely on sort of offsetting our emissions. But also we should note that a lot of the projects and interventions we're sort of working on now, there's a lot of work up front, but we won't see reductions immediately. So it'll be a few years before sort of the reductions start to drop. Is what we're hoping.
Yeah, just to come in briefly there, just to answer a question that was given earlier, actually asked earlier, we're trying to align the method this year with previous years, so there's consistency. We're using a tool called the LGA greenhouse gas accounting tool to compile all the data, and part of that is categorising each thing that we're measuring. There's obviously scope 1, 2, and 3, but they've got their own categories outsourced and additional items within that. So we're just making that completely consistent for this year to previous financial year, which may mean actually that last financial year is going to be, the total is going to be adjusted slightly. But yeah, once we've got that data and compiled it, we'll be able to give you a complete answer as to whether it's gone up or down, really.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I mean, we will be reporting this in all likelihood to June. It might be cabinet and then council, or May, June, depending on how we get on. But we should have that data for you in the late spring to report to all members. Picking up the second point then, an adaptation strategy. Yes, absolutely. It's not just us. There has been a briefing note on this, which Sam had prepared for us, and that explicitly noted that if we're going to do this in an effective way, it needs to involve a range of organisations, infrastructure providers. You know, there would be little point in us preparing an adaptation strategy that didn't take account of the resilience or otherwise of our electricity network, for example, or our water supply network. So we do need to work with us, most particularly around the hospital trusts and the ICS, because there is a shared agenda there in terms of social care and healthcare, which is crucial. So that is the proposal, that we would be doing this jointly with those organisations and other stakeholders, and that is the plan of campaign, if I can put it that way. So wider community engagement, I think, is a really interesting point, and I note the point about the advisory group is different to a task and finish group, for example, of the council, in the sense that it includes external representation. And whilst it doesn't have business representation direct there, I think it's fair to say, and colleagues can elaborate on this, I'm sure, but we do involve very large numbers of businesses. So we work very closely, for example, with the economic growth team, who are regularly referring businesses to us, either people who've got an issue that they want some help to resolve. Palethorpe's Bakery come to mind in Market Drayton, had an energy supply problem which was preventing them from expanding. We've been trying to help them to resolve that using renewable energy. And one of the ways in which we've been able to do that is that the council sponsors, provides grant for a number of business support initiatives in Shropshire. The first of those is called Cool Shropshire, and it's a free business advice service which will help businesses to measure their own carbon emissions and develop a plan for reducing those. And the second is the Big Solar Co-op, which is a not-for-profit organisation, which is basically, its purpose is to crowdfund and install roof-mounted solar panels on business roofs, specifically business roofs. And they are currently working with Palethorpe's to put in place a very large solar array on their premises, which will help to meet the additional power demand that derives from that expansion. That's an example. But we're also working with groups of farmers. We're working with a whole range of different interests across the piece. So there is some of that. It's just not captured explicitly as part of a partnership arrangement. Third piece was around local nature recovery partnerships, and I shall defer to Dan, I think.
Yeah, the local nature recovery partnerships is very much kind of the ecology team side of things, really. So they are definitely taking a full lead on that, and I'm only partially aware of what they're doing. I would hope to get involved once there's drafts in place, because certainly you consider the habitats that can store carbon quicker than others. There's plenty of options in terms of where you put habitats and what we can put in there. Everyone thinks trees the best thing, which it's by no means the best option. So, for example, the 102,000 trees we've planted so far as part of our community tree scheme have stored only about 50 tons of carbon so far, because they're quite young trees and so forth. But if you re-wetted 2 hectares of peatland, the carbon given off by dried up or drained peatland per hectare is about 32 tons per hectare per year if it's farmed as arable. So you can see just 2 hectares of that, 3/4 of the size of this the Shirehall area would be equivalent to all the tree planted so far. So we've so there's things like we're working with Harper Adams to look at a system of farming called paludiculture. So farmers can keep farming an area, but paludiculture is basically farming on wetland. So there's quite a few sort of options for that. It could be short rotation willow coppice, where they use the willow for biomass. there's a very interesting new development that Harper Adams are working with, which is looking at reed mace. I don't know if you reed mace or bulrushes with the brown tops and the fluffy stuff that they put in puffer jackets, and then they can use the rest of the plant as packaging materials. So there's a lot of different options there, so we can kind of work with farmers and allow them to keep farming. The other thing we're doing is looking very seriously at agroforestry, so growing trees on farmland. Again, I think that's a very positive way forward and can work with our local nature recovery strategy, particularly with habitats like parkland and orchards, which are both forms of agroforestry. So we've recently contributed, well, not directly. I got some funding in from DEFRA and the Tree Council a few years ago to run a trees outside woodland project. So that's looking at encouraging agroforestry and planting trees outside woodland, as the name suggests. So we've used some of that funding to work with a company developing a tool to help farmers to plan out their agroforestry operations and so forth. So that's another way we've used some of the funding we've got to promote that. But yeah, I'm not directly involved in the local nature recovery strategy at the moment, but certainly hope to be in those other aspects, particularly around tree planting and habitat management, that I can feed into that.
Thanks, Sam. Next bit was around renewable energy and whether or not we're exporting. Again, I'm going to defer to Simon, who is more of our expert on this. I have a vague feeling that the figure was 15% of the potential. Is that about right?
Yeah. So in terms of an exact figure, in terms of what to aim for, I would have to refer to data elsewhere and have to come back to you on that. But again, there's a large amount of dependencies in terms of, I think what we're striving for is obviously try and get to a stage where we're self-sufficient, trying to obviously generate as much as possible for the county itself and support our own needs. But I think it's certainly an aspiration, and it obviously relies on a lot of different things and factors that are our control that may need to come into play. So, such as, not to bring it up, but the policy around onshore wind, that's going to be a huge factor if we're to get anywhere near that potential option one day of being able to generate enough power to export. So I'm more than happy to take that away and just look at if there's any more sort of specific figures to share with you.
Thank you. And this is another one.
Nearly there. I think the last one. Just to note, actually, on the renewable energy piece, that Shropshire is the 5th largest producer of solar energy in the UK. Not necessarily well known. So we are already quite a big energy producer. That sounds like a lot, but that's more a function of the fact that we're nowhere is getting anywhere near the full potential. So there is a lot of potential as yet unmet, but the biggest constraint on that is the local grid architecture. The ability to get a grid connection is heavily impaired, and in many cases it can take 10 years to get consent for a connection. That is going to significantly impair things. So the final point, Chair, was around partnerships with other stakeholders and a sort of wider coordinating role. I think we kind of touched on this earlier, really. We do work with a wide range of different stakeholders. We do enjoy very good working relations with Zero Carbon Shropshire, who have taken on the mantle, as it were, of coordinating efforts across Shropshire at a community level and taking some ownership of the wider performance of Shropshire in carbon terms. What we've committed to as an organisation thus far is to take responsibility for our own corporate emissions and to do our level best to help everybody else. And that can act through the business community, can act by supporting community action, which we do actively. So there is more opportunity to do that, and we would be looking forward to doing that as things move forward. My understanding is that Zero Carbon Shropshire and the other community climate organisations are looking to plan a conference this summer, at which they will be looking to work out a kind of update to the strategy and the best way forward. And that chimes quite nicely with our own plans as a task force, which are to carry out a midterm review of our existing adopted corporate climate strategy for publication in 2025.
Still got that. It was just to add that, just to be clear, there are 48 designated regions within the UK to produce local nature recovery strategies. It's ourselves with Telford and Wrekin Council, or what I would call Civic Shropshire, and we're the responsible authority for that. So I think it's useful to know we've got that kind of line leadership role. Les Purslow is leading the kind of work within the ecology team, and our environmental health colleagues are part of that. So there's an interesting bit there about that kind of cross-border working. To kind of, I think it's useful to us to be cognizant of that. I know that conversations are already taking place with lots of agencies. So it's been raised, for example, at the Integrated Care Board as an issue. I think that's kind of been highlighted in some of the things there. I know we talk about it in the River Severn Partnership, for example, and in all of those kind of properties north of Shrewsbury, there's a conversation going on with government about a pilot for ELMS, which is the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which is rewarding landowners for the use of land for wider social good. So we're at the forefront of those kind of things. So I think helpful to do that. I think also useful to flag that in the new Marches Forward partnership with Paris, Herefordshire and Monmouthshire, the leader has the lead role for the nature, energy and climate adaptation bit. So we're kind of leading in that kind of partnership space as well. So in that sense, in the world of partnerships, I think I'm just kind of positioning it with members that we're actually quite central to a lot of this agenda and kind of driving this forward.
Okay, thank you. I'm just wondering whether we can challenge businesses to come in on this via social media and everything else. Yeah.
Well, just to add to that, Chair, there has been a discussion at the Shropshire Economic Partnership. I think one of the things that I can do from this work is make sure that what is kind of discussed as kind of the need and the thoughts of members gets internalised into that forum.
Yeah.
Like that.
Thank you very much. Yes, Adrian.
Just while we're on that subject, it's worth noting that there is an awful lot of growth potential in this. And I can use to reinforce that or justify that statement on the grounds that we've been approached recently by large investment company who are representing clients with a very, very significant size portfolio, and we're into the hundreds of billions, they themselves have identified Shropshire as a potential area for investment in environmental growth activity. So they came to us, not the other way around. And so we are, as it were, in the spotlight in terms of capitalising on that potential. So really very important to note that a lot of the things that the Marches Forward group is looking at, and one of those is around the establishment of an environmental investment zone, something I'm sure you'll hear more about in future meetings perhaps. There is investment out there which is actively interested in supporting growth in this type of business area within the Shropshire geography.
Just one question, then I'll come to the other questions of members. Is that because we're rural and green, and is that a good thing for Shropshire?
I think it's partly because we're rural and green, and so we do have the ability to use the land as an asset in a variety of ways. But it's also, I'm bound to say this really, that we do have quite a high national profile on this agenda. So some of the work that we're involved with on biochar, which Dan is playing a leading role in, on green hydrogen, which Ollie is playing a leading role in, and on things like the EV charging network and the stuff I mentioned earlier to do with housing retrofit. We are certainly probably in the top 10 nationally of authorities dealing with those topic areas. And that means that we attract attention at a national level, and that includes attention from potential investors. So some of this is reputation.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. I've got Ed, Steve and Rob in that order. So Ed.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. I just want to talk about planning and the policy within Shropshire Council. As Nick and myself sit in Southern Planning, I know members sit on Northern Planning. We've had a significant number of solar planning applications, and we have a dilemma around food security and best and most versatile land, and the use of land for production of food versus the use of land for the production of energy. I was part of an appeal last couple of weeks ago, and I know there's another one upcoming. I don't know whether it's acres or hectares. Shropshire is supposed to deliver 500 acres or hectares, perhaps. I don't know if anyone knows that. And we over a year for the next 10 years, I think, within planning policy. This was raised at the inspectorate, which we achieved. We are achieving, but we are also either granting planning permission or losing appeals for solar production on best and most versatile land. And there's a big debate between 3A and 3B, 3A being best and most versatile, 3B, and you can have both in a field, and you would never tell the difference between the quality of the crop that's grown there. It's about soil and bits and pieces like that. Where does food security fit into all this as an agricultural county? And also on the flip side, then you have things such as poultry units and the impact they have on the environment around ammonia, particularly around our watercourse. And I'm glad you touched on working with farmers, particularly around from an environmental point of view around ecology. We've been part of an experiment this year about undersowing a grass crop under maize so that it's not left, which most maize fields are. It's been reasonably successful. What sort of, where does that play into things? If you look across Shropshire, we produce an awful lot of maize here, either for the production of dairy or it goes into anaerobic digestion and things like that. So that left all winter as barren, bare earth, effectively, with huge amounts of erosion and wash off, which doesn't help from a flooding perspective. How does that all fit into there, and what conversations are you having with NFU and people like that? So I know there's a lot there, but mainly planning with a bit of agriculture thrown in.
Yeah, okay, I'll pick up the planning bit. I might defer to Dan on some of the kind of agricultural land management piece, because he's more expert at this than I am. In terms of the planning piece, I think I want to make a couple of points, really. The first of which is the area of land that is taken for solar will be a function of the state of the electricity grid rather than actual availability. In theory, you could carpet large areas of Shropshire in solar, and there would be enough solar power coming in to make it worthwhile. In practice, a tiny subset of that land area is actually going to be deliverable because of the constraints on the grid. And I think that is significant because it means we're never going to see Shropshire carpeted in any form of renewable energy infrastructure. I think the second thing, and hopefully you won't shoot me down on this, Ed, but my understanding is that from NFU, that around about 85% of farm businesses in Shropshire and Herefordshire would not be viable without subsidy. That was a figure that came from Ed Garrett, so I assume it's correct. So this is perhaps best viewed as a form of diversification in appropriate circumstances. The final bit perhaps is around how solar can form suitable use on a proportion of the land against other alternatives. So I think I'm right in saying that actually there is a greater area of land in Shropshire devoted to golf courses than there is to solar farms. And I think, I'm not suggesting necessarily that we start putting solar farms on golf courses or that we start ploughing them up and making them into arable land either. But it is a relatively small proportion of the total, which I think is around about 0.5%, that would be needed to actually max out our solar production. Is actually a tiny area of land. So I'm not in any sense decrying the need to strike the right balance between food production and energy production. What I'm suggesting is that there's an opportunity to generate more energy without significantly impacting on food production at all. In terms of the other pieces around poultry litter and water quality and farming practices, Dan, are you happy to pick that up?
I can try and tackle a few of those. Yeah, I'll go on to the poultry emissions thing first, because that's, I'm quite excited about that, because we're working with some of the biochar thing. So we're working with Kate Main, I'm sure you know, and a few other poultry farmers to so I helped write a bid for the Marches LEP fund to start a trial on the use of biochar under poultry litter. So there's a lot of promise with that in its ability to absorb pollutants. It's got sort of a chemical charge to it, so it actually attracts quite a few compounds, including ammonia. So there's currently a trial just about to start using biochar in straw pellets. So we hope that can go some way to reducing ammonia emissions, either directly in the shed or the storage of litter outside of that. I've also been having conversations with they sort of produce enzymes, which are basically the same sort of chemicals that are produced by microbes in a compost heap, essentially, that break down organic matter. So they're based up near Oswestry, and they're called low-hash recycling, and they can take poultry litter and turn it into a high-quality fertilizer within 3 hours. So it's a very interesting prospect that I'm going to be following up as well. So again, that reduces emissions massively, because it basically even if you get poultry litter and pelletize it for shipping elsewhere, it still loses about 90%, 30% of its nitrogen to the atmosphere. So this process loses less than 1% apparently, and less than 1% of the carbon as well. So there's some interesting developments there. Other aspects on the poultry emissions, again, biochar can be quite useful. I know there was a company called ONU who were talking to Herefordshire Council about pyrolysing the chicken litter, so that turning it into biochar. I think they've moved on. They've copied our model, and they're now looking at green waste. Although they also now seem to be lacking in funding, so we might be taking on where they left off. Around the aspects of maize, obviously there's I know I don't know a huge amount of that. It sounds great that that they're underplanting it with grass. My direct involvement is kind of limited in those sorts of things, but there's the whole food security side of things. I think we need to keep an eye on the biotech sort of sector. I think there's a lot of development in that, including things like precision fermentation, which you might be aware of, which is basically doing things like it used to be that insulin, rennet and so forth were very difficult chemicals to make, and now they just produce them in a vat with genetically modified bacteria. There is a lot of focus, certainly in the States, where there's got different regulatory sort of hurdles, where they're looking at producing basically all the proteins you can get from milk in vats produced by bacteria. So whether you think it's a good idea or a bad idea, it's coming, and it could have massive implications for farming in Shropshire and elsewhere, where basically proteins and fats could be made in vats using hundreds of the resources that typically animal agriculture uses. So that I think needs to be kept an eye on. I think we could see it as an opportunity in terms of growing the feedstocks, but that could be things like maize, which then have other knock-on consequences. So I'm very keen to look at a sort of biotechnology strategy, which will kind of look at a lot of these things in the round. We've got local expertise in the Energy and Byproducts Research Institute at Aston University that I've had quite a lot of links with. So I feel that we could do a lot by making the most of this technology coming up, while also addressing some of the concerns that would have for our farming communities.
Thank you. It sounds like the gentleman from Aston might be somebody we might be interested in the Tasker Finish group, I think. Ian, did you say you've got to go early?
Yeah.
If you need to come in.
Yeah, just picking up, was a lot of good conversation. And thanks, Adrian, and the team for getting. And thanks for the questions. I think when we talk about the monitoring and how it's going to affect, and that piece that Gary mentioned about the perfect world, the 10%, but I have to think about getting it the right way around. But the hockey stick effect, okay. Last time I said this, Julian corrected me because I put the hockey stick the wrong way. But that, and it's the projects that the team are looking at. So, for example, the Pyrolysis project, which is ongoing and advanced, and we're getting. I'm constantly. In fact, yesterday we got approached by Lincolnshire, who have directed on to. Unfortunately, I had an hour and a half's conversation with them yesterday, but it shows you that we are leading the way in a lot of those things, and people are coming to us for it. And the other one being our relationship with Keele University now, where we're actually using Keele University resources to help us. They're obviously after the research thing, but it's not costing us anything. And we have a visit planned for members to go over to see the work that they're doing there as well. On the solar stuff, most of the solar stuff we have got going or ongoing is going in places which isn't useful for anything else. So previous tips, etc., which will, and can still be used for what it's presently being used for, sheep grazing. So that sort of thing has been borne in mind. And Julian, you mentioned earlier about the nature recovery. I mean, those meetings that Janet Cobb and her group organise are really useful. I've spoken recently with Andy Wild, and he's looking now at getting, and he's been to some of the meetings as well, about getting ID Verde involved. Not ID Verde, it'll be Street Scene involved, got new member coming to Street Scene to look at that sort of recovery of verges, etc. So we're starting to get it. I know it seems like it takes a long time, but there's nearer crocodiles to look at that need to be dealt with. But these things are coming up and are being dealt with. And the other thing being the issue with the marches forward, that ability to what that will bring to us as a county, but to the whole marches forward group, the fact that we've now got a bigger population base to put bids against, the fact that we can work together, so things like solar panels, buying them in bulk so that we get more bang for our buck. There's a lot of good stuff that will come out of that, and Shropshire Council are the lead for the environmental piece within that. So I think there's a lot of potential to come out of that. But the main thing being, some of those projects, although we're below the 10% now, when these projects do kick in, I know it is sort of jam tomorrow, but when they do kick in, and this is why we're getting interest, even the electric vehicle charging. I've been down to London twice to speak about electric vehicle charging and how come Shropshire's been so successful in it. We've been invited down to another conference there, and in the back of that, we're networking and bringing Shropshire to the fore with a lot of those things, and that's happening with the hydrogen, because there's big agencies who want to work with us because they can see that the aspirations to do well are here. So I just thought it's worth getting them in. Yes, it looks low at the minute, but that hockey stick will hopefully kick in. Thank you.
Thank you. And it sounds like we've got some very exciting things going on. We're not very good at singing our own song, are we? Or promoting ourselves. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mark and Ian. We'll go to Steve, you're next.
All right, okay. Seems a long time ago.
I know it was. Thank you.
Adrian, you mentioned retrofitting.
Yeah.
Houses. I think you mentioned millions. How does anybody qualify that? Who has qualified for that, and what has been retrofitted?
Right. Somebody's on.
So sorry.
Thanks. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, no, this is a really interesting area of work, actually. So I'm not, because we're not directly involved in it, I may not necessarily have the full picture for you, and it's perhaps something that could be directed to James Latiri. She might want to bring her team along to discuss that with you in more detail. But in general terms, just from my limited knowledge, so there are qualifying criteria for people benefiting from that grant funding, which are not similar to some of the kind of care thresholds. So I think there are income constraints, I think, and so on. But it's actually being delivered in practice by the Marches Energy Agency, working with others. So we work very closely with them to do this. The type of activity which they are looking at is defined by the grant criteria. So it involves a lot of emphasis on the energy efficiency performance of the building. How is it built? How well insulated is it? And that is because a lot of the low carbon heating, for example, options need or work best within a properly insulated dwelling. And the kinds of, that can have a frankly, life-changing impact for people. I'm not exaggerating. There's been some stuff in the press and on the news recently as examples where people have had a retrofit. They're on a very low income. They can't afford to heat their home adequately. The home becomes very damp and it's a very unhealthy environment in which for somebody to live. It could be a family, it could be an older person. Retrofitting with appropriate energy efficiency measures, that could be changing the doors, fitting external wall insulation, internal wall insulation, replacement windows, all of those things, loft insulation, underfloor insulation, and in some cases, all of those things. There have been some houses where they have actually done all of those things. In rough cost terms, that would be in the order of 50 to 60,000 pounds per dwelling. But here's the but for us. I think particularly this is really significant because what is the cost to Shropshire Council of providing the care services that might otherwise be required for that person, or the cost of the NHS of that person being in and out of hospital with various health conditions that might very well have resulted from that work not having been completed. I think it's a bigger picture here. So we're very lucky. We have been successful, and hats off to colleagues in the Affordable Warmth team for being so successful on this in terms of getting grant monies in. I think, have one of the largest grant awards, certainly the largest in the Marches by a country mile, but one of the largest in the West Midlands, which I think tells you quite a lot, given that includes Birmingham. So we are doing very, very well on this agenda, and I would heartily recommend you might want to dig into that in a bit more detail in due course.
Thank you. Rob.
Thank you, Chair. I had 3 questions, but I will ask them very briefly. The first was on, in every council report, we get a climate change assessment. I want to know, what's your view on those assessments? Do you look at all of those? They come through your team? So they do seem to have a very variable quality from what I've seen and noted. And there are places where I can see there are things which could be mentioned, which are not. Second point was around, you talked about corporate emissions, and you talked about wider Shropshire emissions where you hope to influence. I want to ask about the grey area where there are wider Shropshire emissions where Shropshire Council directly impacts upon those emissions. And I think specifically looking at transport, it's probably one of the biggest areas of that, where what Shropshire Council invests in terms of transport infrastructure directly impacts how people travel. And I want to know what your view was of our current status as a local transport plan, because we know, I think we've all admitted that local transport plan 3 is out of date. Local transport plan 4 we're still waiting for. It is emerging. I know it's been used in its emerging state to influence things, but I don't think we as councillors have seen that. So what's your view on that? And last thing was, do you think there is a revenue generating potential from your team? Do you think there is, given particularly the financial state of the council, but also the expertise you've got, is there a way in which revenue could be generated from the work that you are doing?
Thank you. Eugene.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. In terms of the climate appraisal in reports to Cabinet and Council, yes, I screen every one of those myself personally. It is quite demanding to do on some occasions, as you might imagine. Only rarely are there reports where the climate agenda has no bearing, is what I would say. And I do challenge very frequently. In fact, I think my colleagues are probably quite sick of me. But very often I will actually suggest things that they may not have thought of. Now, if they haven't thought of the climate implications, I think that is an indication of the need for wider awareness raising and training, and we are doing that. We have an active programme of carbon literacy, as most of you will be aware, and I know some of you have completed this already. That is ongoing, and in fact, Sam and colleagues are in the process of putting together the next cohort, which will be at the end of this month, starting at the end of this month, in order to provide carbon literacy training for senior staff involved in commissioning and procuring contracts from external organisations, for fairly obvious reasons, given our earlier discussion. I mean, I'm very interested, perhaps outside the meeting, if you wanted to give me an example of something where you thought it could have been done better. Undoubtedly, there is room for improvement. One of the most common things that I comment on is around the need to build in a requirement to measure the outcome performance. It's all very well saying what might be relevant, but there does need to be a commitment somewhere to actually look at how it's relevant and what the outcomes of that decision. And that is something we shall continue to push on. Second point around what we might directly influence, and you're quite right. So in broad terms, Shropshire Council's corporate footprint is less than 1% of Shropshire's. Okay. Our direct and indirect emissions are only a very small part of Shropshire's wider carbon footprint. However,
We do, of course, have a whole load of different regulatory roles, planning, public protection, transport, and so on, which do have an influence on carbon performance. Up to a third of it can be influenced by our regulatory roles, for example. So we do need to use that. Obviously, our ability to do so is restricted to some extent by national policy. Certainly, that's the case in the planning field. Yes, we can ask for a variety of things, and we would like to. But the bottom line is that we can't insist on measures which would make development unviable financially. Unfortunately, unless somebody at the national level is prepared to change building regs in the way that they've started to do, it's very difficult to go very far beyond that envelope. In terms of the LTP specifically, what's been very interesting about LTP4, and my team has been directly involved in that work, and we are continuing to be directly involved, particularly Ollie and myself, is that the government has rewritten the guidance LTPs and how they should be written to put carbon performance front and centre, which is very welcome. So it so happens that the organisation involved with commissioned by government to write that guidance was actually WSP. So understandably enough, we have a very good idea of what the guidance, although it has yet to be finalised, we've got a very good idea of what the direction of travel of that guidance and the kinds of things that it might mean for our own LTP4 in due course. So I'm upbeat about LTP4 in broad terms. Final piece around revenue generation, absolutely. I mean, part of the reason for referencing earlier the fact that we've been able to bring in such a substantial amount of grant money. In broad terms, we have covered our own costs in 4 years as a team in terms of what we've brought in. But more important than that, I think some of the projects that we've mentioned moving forward, particularly that's around biochar and to some extent the solar proposition in Oswestry and other development like that, will be revenue generating. So it will yield a net financial benefit to Shropshire Council as well as a significant carbon benefit. And there is more of that that can be done. And we would certainly be keen to explore that as we move forward.
Thank you. I think last question, Nick.
Thank you. I know I'm last, so I'll be quick, and it's one question. It's to do with electric car charging points, and I'd declare an interest. I've got an electric car myself. How do you feel that our policy with installing electric car charging points, and I know we've done a lot in the last year or more, installing them in public car parks, but a case in point, I had a Tesla car driver in my shop a few weeks back. Other cars are available, of course. Asking where he could get a rapid charge for his Tesla because it had run down to 30 or 40 miles. And a quick search online at 6 o'clock in the evening showed the only place he could go was the M54 service station. And he needed it desperately. He was off to the Norfolk Broads the next day. I don't think he'd done his planning correctly. It was, with the cost of a rapid charge point, I'm told, is around about £20,000 a piece. And it is possible that if some were installed, this could come back to revenue for the council as well, perhaps, in the future. I mean, there are differing views on electric cars, whether they're the answer or not. Personally, for me, I feel that they are, but we have to see. But how do you feel that we're progressing as a council with installing charging points?
Thank you. I'll kick off and then I'll hand over to Ollie, who's got the detail. But I should also declare an interest as also being an electric car driver. I mean, obviously, most electric vehicles will charge at home most of the time. And what is it? 80% of UK vehicles do less than 35 miles a day. So actually, for most short distance trips, an electric vehicle, I'm bound to say, is a highly practical proposition. Longer distance, if you're going to Norfolk, yes, absolutely. The issue, I think, with rapid chargers is twofold, and I'll let Ollie come in with more detail. But in broad terms, we are not being offered grant to establish rapid chargers, which unfortunately are nearer 40,000 a piece, as opposed to 3,000 or 4,000 for a normal kind of post-based one like you see in our car parks, for example. But the second thing really is that there has been a certain amount of investment from the private sector in this, particularly around supermarkets and so on, and we don't wish to compete with that. if there's clearly a shortfall, then there may be a rationale for us to get involved. But it isn't something that's a primary focus for at the moment. Ollie, do you want to?
Yep, I can pick up on that. It is an issue that has been raised with us several times. I think, as Adrian said, I think the government expected the private sector to sort of fund these rapid charges, but in Shropshire there isn't really the demand to make it sort of financially viable. But we are hoping through the most recent government fund, which is the Levi Fund, we're hoping we might be able to use some of that for rapid charges, but it really depends on what the government allows in our application. But it's something that we're aware of and we're looking for opportunities.
Can I have a question related to that? Electricity used to be cheap, it's not cheap anymore. So are people not wanting to use electricity? Is it too expensive to use electric now and people prefer to have petrol or diesel?
Best example I think I can give you is that my car did 15,000 miles last year, all electric. That cost me 4 pence a mile. If I'd only charged it at home, it would have been 2 pence a mile. It is incredibly cheap to run an electric vehicle, but you do have to be quite organised if you're doing longer trips. Now, I've been to the west coast of Scotland in it. I've been to the south coast in it. It is not a problem. It can be done, but it does take longer and it does require a bit of planning. In terms of the costs, actually, they are very cheap to run. They're expensive to buy, but overall, I think you'll find that many fleet buyers, for example, really favour them because they require a lot less maintenance. There are far fewer moving parts. Petrol and diesel cars average 350 moving parts. Electric vehicle, fewer than 90. And so it only requires servicing every other year and it's very cheap to do. So operationally, in cost terms, it's low.
That's a question. What size is your car? Is it very small? Because we've got a big one. My husband's got a big one.
No.
And actually, it works out the cost is sorry about that. The cost of using electricity against using diesel, actually, the diesel proved cheaper at one point when the prices were high. So I'm wondering, I'll rephrase it, what car have you got?
It's a large car. It is a Skoda, a large estate car, a sort of tall estate, a Skoda Enyaq. Anybody wants to look it up? We are frankly delighted with it. It's probably the best car we've ever had.
Okay.
And it's enormous inside.
I just want to know about the size now and how big it was. Okay. You want another question? Julian? Yeah, Rosemary, and then those are the last two questions. Thank you.
Whilst we're talking about decarbonising transport, I'm just interested in the fleet story in terms of the heavy vehicles. We had a very interesting presentation to the Town Council from G Fleet, who are locally based advisors on this, and we're very much of the opinion that electrification is going to be the answer. Scania has pulled out hydrogen, so I'm just wondering, but in terms of the cost for them to do it, that seems to be the question, and it probably makes sense to just monitor it. And then last night on the radio, I was hearing somebody talking about the real important one of the aspects of that is looking for opportunities to retrofit your old vehicles, because otherwise what happens is they just get exported and continue to burn diesel. So I'm just wondering where we are with that story.
Yep, I can answer that one. So currently, Shropshire Council's fleet is about 200 vehicles, and about 15 of them are EVs at the minute, and a further 25 are hybrids. At the minute, our plan is, as they get to the end of their contracts, our petrol or diesels, we'll transfer them over to EVs. But there are some vehicles where it looks like it's not possible. It's probably more achievable for Shrewsbury Town Council because of the routes that they do. But I think Shropshire Council are experiencing for the longer and hillier routes, there aren't EV equivalents yet, and they'll probably come with time. But that's sort of why we're looking at green hydrogen for those vehicles at the minute.
Just add to that. So the big issue for HGVs and EVs is about range. So, for example, Veolia have tested all electric refuse collection vehicles, and they work fine within the body of, say, Shrewsbury, for example, or on the urban routes. Where they don't currently work fine is on the rural routes, because the combination of the mileage and the bin lift system is too heavy a load for the battery. The other issue we're looking at, for example, buses, is yes, they do have the range to go, for example, from Shrewsbury to Whitchurch and back, but the problem is you then need to charge it, and that will take 2 to 3 hours at least, so you need a second bus. So currently, it isn't a technology which we can use in a rural context like ours, which is why we have been looking at green hydrogen. I think that the truth is that, as usual, there will be a mixture, and it's always a mistake to think that there's a single solution to any problem. That's definitely the case with transport options. We have applied, we don't know the outcome yet, but we will obviously let you know. We have applied for £500,000 worth of DFT funding to install a green hydrogen refueler in Shrewsbury. If that is successful, we should know in the next few weeks. And that will allow us to test the application of, for example, Britas, which are generally operating in the worst possible conditions for a battery vehicle, using green hydrogen. And the difference is that a green bus, for example, a green hydrogen bus has a range of 680 miles, as opposed to maybe 150. And it takes less than 10 minutes to fuel up. So there are advantages in that will be a mixture of the two things.
Very interesting. Thank you. Rosemary, last question.
Thank you. Yeah, it was about, I think you said earlier on we were talking about exporting energy, and Simon was talking about the fact that there's a lack of infrastructure, really. And I've understood correctly what I've read. I think there's a lack of infrastructure for high-speed car charging, and that getting the actual energy supply into that charger is not a simple thing. And I also understand that using high-speed charge is not necessarily great for the batteries. The slower ones are actually better, I think. So I was thinking that really it's better for the council really to be using our infrastructure network that we've got that is lower voltage. And in terms of our own vehicles, obviously there's the time of charging, which I'm thinking you use the vans during the day and then charge at night. There's all sorts of sort of things behind that need to catch up on that. So
yeah, I mean, what's interesting in this whole agenda, actually, and it applies across the piece, all the topics that we've talked about, is that the technology and the state of the art is changing very, very quickly. We're fond of saying that every day is a school day, and we learn something new every day. Battery technology is changing extremely quickly. Hydrogen technology is changing extremely quickly, and various of these other things. But as things stand, power supply is probably a more significant constraint, for example, for HGVs running on electric power than the availability of the battery technology. If for example, you had a number of HGVs at a motorway service station and they were electric, and they wanted to draw, I gather, up to 1 megawatt of power per hour each, where would that power come from? I mean, you're talking about maybe 10 or a dozen HGVs drawing power that's simultaneously. You would need a power supply of 12 megawatts, which is 50% more than the energy recovery plant at Battlefield produces. Just to put it in context. So I think it will be a mixture of options. And you're right. I mean, in terms of power supply and batteries, rapid chargers are fine if used judiciously. Most battery vehicles, it's not good to charge them above 80% regularly, because it slows down at that point. The charging rate slows down. You don't want to overfill it, is how it was best explained to me, so that the charging rate slows down. And over time, it can degrade the battery. But again, put in context, used properly, a battery vehicle is good. The battery is good for approximately 300,000 to 400,000 miles. Not very many petrol or even diesel vehicles that do that kind of mileage. So it's not a huge risk, but it does require, careful management.
Thank you, Adrian. Your enthusiasm for your subject matter is evident to everybody. So you've got a passion for it. I'd like to thank you for the report, which is a really good one, and it's been very educational today. And thank you to your team. It's been good to meet you all, and I'm sure everybody will agree. And I'm sure we all come across us at the Task and Finish group, which we are about to check up. Thank you very much. If you want to leave, you can. Okay, or you can stay and listen to next. It's entirely up to you. I know you're very good.
Yeah, thank you.
So everybody noted, yeah? Thank you, and we'll move on to item 8, which is Common and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee Work Programme. So,
Yeah, so in terms of the work programme, we are heading towards the end of this year, unsurprisingly.
Oh, sorry, I jumped.
That's all right.
So back the jumping away thing. That was my
Well,
fault.
I'll come back to it because it's the main part of the conversation
All right.
anyway.
Okay, that's all right.
Okay, so the work programme is just to say you will have received invitations to work programming sessions in March. So we're going to try and follow the same principle and get those moving. We want to try and bring in the directors, portfolio holders, assistant directors, and others to inform that, so you're able to look forward to your work programme into next year. So we've got one piece of work we're looking at still from that, which is developing in terms of reference one for a Task and Finish group, looking at transport, which we can bring back into that. So that I think will pick up on the questions around the LT4. And the other Task and Finish group, which I think will probably be going live after today, will be the one that you've got before you now, which is on climate change and the environment. So it's just to sort of say where this one starts, it will continue into the next year. In much the same way as anyone who's involved in river water quality at Bristol course as well. And it's a nice segue into this because it is that work which recommended this Task and Finish group. And I think we'll pick up on some of the points and questions which were raised here by you today. So Ed may ask the questions about sort of agriculture and Druid, the egg and chicken farming, and that very much was a next stage of work around the river water quality, where the focus had been on sewage, but they're then moving more widely to highways and agriculture. And I think part of the thinking behind that river water quality task in this one was the environment, climate change, and the river water quality really are very much hand in hand as topics. So I won't go through this in detail. What I will say is, before you is that terms of reference, it's a standing Task and Finish group. So the idea is that we're not going to time limit it for the year. It will run through the year. We will look at the Task and Finish group reporting back into here at regular points. So it can be every 3 months, every 6 months. This is the parent committee. So and similarly, depending on what you identify, you may want to follow up on points and investigations, but there may be topics which come out of that you want to come back to this committee and use this committee as its formal base to do that investigation or receive those points. And just to say as well, I think the reason we put it on today, we timed it with this, and it's great to see Adrian sort of stay behind as well, is actually there are some really significant opportunities which you've just heard about, which I think you might want to be, as a committee, suggesting to this Task and Finish group they consider as some of their first pieces of work. But that's me done.
So we're now moving on to the right items. Probably if I cross them off when I get to them, and then I think we've done them. So it's the work programme. No, we're not. We're looking at draft terms of reference for the standard climate change. You have them in front of you. Has everybody had an opportunity to read them and look at them? Is everybody happy with them? Is there something you think needs to be added?
You think?
Yes, surely. Yes, get those.
I think on the objectives, Madam Chair, do you think we've got too many objectives there for a task in this group? I think there's what, 14 different objectives there.
If it's on running, this will be going on. It's not just a quick one. It's one that's going to run.
You're more likely to get the work done. We break it down to maybe to less is more sometimes.
Well,
just an observation.
Yeah, no, I would suspect that that's what it would be broken down in each meeting that they have. And if you want to come in at any point, Adrian, you're more than welcome, because it will involve you. Julian, your thoughts on it, because Julian, I appreciate the fact that you're, and you as well, Rosemary, are very into this sort of thing. I don't know if that's a nice way, but not really. But understand it more than most, I would say. Julian.
Thank you. I think these are fine. And my main comment is I suppose a concern comment towards Adrian in terms of demand on time. Because if this is a standing task and finish group and we're meeting regularly, then I mean, first of all, I think interesting what Adrian said in terms of the other teams involved. So I don't think we necessarily always need to hear from Adrian and his team. It might well be that we're hearing from highways from the Warmer Homes team. And I did just want to celebrate their work, as you say. I mean, just to abuse my opportunity here for a second, my son used to work for the Marches Energy Agency and now works for a charity in London doing similar work, constantly refers back to Shropshire and the Marches Energy Agency, which is well ahead of what is going on in many London boroughs, actually. So congratulations to all involved on that. I do think we need to, be aware of that. But my point is that with the stakeholder board and with the task and finish group, just think we need to be a little bit careful, whether we actually have a joint meeting on one opportunity rather than doubling up and having the stakeholder board at the same. I think it'd be quite interesting to hear from the stakeholder board actually as to how they think they're bringing value to the process. So that would be my one suggestion. The other thing I would just throw in again in terms of this. Both Ian has made the point and Adrian has made the point in terms of county councils. We seem to be playing, punching above our weight on this in this field. It will be good to get that confirmed from the LGA, but also to hear from the LGA in terms of what role Shropshire might be playing nationally. So I think that's a legitimate.
So we need to invite someone there.
I think they have the LGA as part of.
I think it fits within the objectives in terms of reference.
Yeah.
But that's really, as you say, task finish. That's a very specific focus that they can take.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I support these.
Yeah. Anybody else got anything? Yes, Rosemary.
Yeah, so
Julie.
Oh, sorry.
thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, some of the things Julian said, I just like to add what I think about it. For example, I don't think that this task and finish group should be demanding the involvement of you and your team, Adrian, all the time. I think we should be a sort of an aside and looking at areas in the council where there are threads that connect and investigating things with other bodies, not necessarily within the council, outside the council. And I think so therefore we shouldn't be placing a huge, I'm sure in the end we'll place a huge workload on it, but but not an ongoing workload while we're operating.
I think that's a very good and valid point. And
it's vital that we don't do that
way as well.
Yeah, I don't do that.
Let me just ask a quick one. The objective number 6, to identify learning from other areas that could help in Shropshire. Can we just clarify what that is? Is that other areas of Shropshire Council or other areas of Shropshire? If I go up first, and then I think, because I'm really keen that everyone hears from Adrian some of what the opportunities are as well, which I think will pick up some of what's there. But in that instance, Nick, that is looking at the benchmarking, so looking at the LGA or other places externally, to see what's going on out there that you can learn or you could recommend if you're on the task and finish group that's brought back into Shropshire. Okay. In the same way, though, there's also a bullet on there, I think, which is about identifying the good practice in Shropshire. We've heard a lot today about how good some of what is happening is and how it's leading in areas. And actually, you as a task and finish or committee as a task and finish group may not need to be selling and celebrating that because it's recognised, but actually some of that is recognising it here in Shropshire. I think other places need to be maybe more aware than I certainly was about some of what's happening.
I agree with you. I think for a I'm doing it dancing out of the song, but that's not the good phrase. And I don't get that. I'll talk about my husband's car.
Yeah.
Yes, they do.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the kind of wider engagement piece and the kind of focus of the task and finish group, it's worth noting several things. Really, the first of which is this is the ultimate cooperative agenda. If we are good at doing this and London boroughs are not, nobody wins. It's in our interest for them to do well, in the same way that it's in our interest for other countries to do well and so on. The other thing then is I think that we do have a lot of engagement with other local authorities. We perhaps need to draw that out and provide that for you so that it's clearer. And we can certainly do that. And there are existing partnerships like Marches Forward and others that are directly relevant to this. But we're also, for example, we're working quite closely with Derbyshire on hydrogen, for example. We're working quite closely with other local authorities on solar power. And we take soundings across as offices across local authorities. It is a very cooperative space. I think the other thing I'd say is that a number of the things that I think you may want to focus on are likely to be things that we ourselves are keen to focus on. So there is, it's not perhaps quite as demanding as it might appear, but clearly very keen to engage other officers who are contributing in this space within Shropshire Council, but also I think there's a real opportunity here potentially as the committee sees fit to engage external bodies like those on the advisory group, but perhaps others as well. You know, it would be really interesting to hear from the Chamber. It would be really interesting to hear from the NFU. And there will be lots of others who may wish to contribute to form a view on how we should best proceed in this space and who and how we work together to do that. So there are a lot, I mean, everybody has an interest in this really, so we'll be a little bit careful to control the scope. But I just, as on the back of an envelope, I'd noted a few things that I thought might be worthy of consideration and happy to provide those through the chair. But it's particularly this piece about the integration of carbon reporting as a normal part of business, sort of double bottom line type approach. That requires somebody from finance to be engaged. Difficult in current circumstances, I understand. There's clearly a piece around supply chain emissions and helping our supply chain to perform better, but then they are also going to be supplying other companies, other local authorities. There's a whole piece around adaptation and resilience, which we've touched on already, where I think we really do need to do something jointly with others in Shropshire. And then I think there's particularly a piece around engaging the wider community. And I know this is also Zero Carbon Shropshire's aspiration. How do we help individuals in Shropshire or communities in Shropshire to make up their own mind about what they might want to do themselves? What investments might they want to make in their own house, their own vehicle, their own business, whatever it might happen to be. Particularly around retrofit. That could also pick up all this around green growth and the need for skills. There is a really big skills agenda in here. Potentially huge opportunities for younger people and people wishing to retrain, to train into appropriate occupations that there will be huge demand for, or there may already be demand for. I'm given to understand anecdotally that it's very difficult now for many of the plumbing firms in Shropshire to actually get new plumbers. There is a dearth of plumbers because they are so busy doing a lot of these new technologies. And so there is a growth option in there. It's a question you might want to put to the Affordable Warmth team because it's particularly pertinent for them with their agenda.
Yeah. Can I ask, is there an exemplar council that stands out for being the best at doing this? Is there somebody we could invite in to speak to?
Probably not a single one, but I'm sure we could put our heads together and find some candidates.
Just throw that in the mix, yeah.
Just to add as well, if you're looking at external groups, I know I mentioned the NFU, you mentioned the NFU, but actually the NFU don't talk or speak for a lot of farmers and in Shropshire, and you've got to reach beyond perhaps the organisations, that umbrella organisations. And also, I don't think anyone's really mentioned the next generation, particularly in agriculture. And Harper Adams is brilliant, but again, they don't represent everyone, if you know what I mean. You've got to get under the skin of sort of, yeah, young farmers, you'll get a broader cross section.
Yeah.
For a farmer's market.
Yeah, and the farmer, and perhaps something like there's I know it's not in Shropshire, but it is sort of, it could be Blim Hill discussion group, who aren't NFU members, but are very keen and interested, and they have about 500 members in this sort of thing. And they you know, it just cuts through the umbrella organisation.
Yeah. Anybody want to add anything else? Are we all happy with what we just discussed and taking it forward? Yeah. Everybody happy with that? I don't think we need to vote. We'll just agree to it, don't we? Yeah. Okay. Going to be a good one. This one. I think I've got feeling in my bones. So that's item 9 then. Well, page 7. Item 9, date time of next meeting is Tuesday, 20th of April at 2 o'clock, but we will be having a meeting before that with a call-in. So just keep an eye on your email. Okay. And I think what we're planning on doing, because I think it'd probably be easier, is doing, well, 3 call-ins, but 2 items.
Excuse me.
So what we're looking at is doing maybe 2 hours in the morning, break for lunch, and then carrying on the other one. So that they're all done the same day, but that they're not grouped together and they haven't got a mix of people. But you'll hear all about it shortly, I'm sure. Tom's working on it. Pardon?
What was that date?
We haven't got a date, they're working on it now, but it will be in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, we're gonna be catching up with the people, members who've raised the call-ins. Just need to check when they will fall best.
So election will be done.
April next
So
week.
then we'll get that.
Yeah. But there are task and finish groups going on from the committee.
Yeah.
So.
It was. I mean, we will confirm the date for the additional meetings for the call-in once we've got it confirmed. I mean, the bit we have to bear in mind is that it is half term coming up then as well. It's early, lands early. All parents wins.
Most of us are.
Yeah, I know. I wins, Rob wins. So
said we can have those as soon as possible because obviously trying to fit things into diaries.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
We will look to try and get them in as soon as we can as well, because obviously we don't want to not move too far forward. We need to get it done, but we do have to meet all the different requirements, publication, publicising meetings.
Yeah, and I think we have to bear in mind as well that both items, whatever happens with them, will impact the budget or would impact the budget. So it needs to be done very quickly. Okay. Well, thank you all very, very much. And thank you, Adrian. And Sam and Simon. Oh, yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, members. Good meeting. Thank you.
I'll just ask the line.